today we'll be talking about finding exoplanets with TESS. And so my name is Sam Yi, and I'm currently a graduate student at Princeton. And yeah, my area of research is quite closely linked to the TESS mission. And so I'm really happy to be able to tell you about how you can use, how we are using TESS to find and study exoplanets. So just to recap, what is TESS? TESS is the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, and as the name implies, it searches for planets using the transit method. And so if you remember from the overview of exoplanets from a couple of weeks ago, detecting exoplanets through the transit method relies on the alignment of the planet passing in front of its host star, and that causes a tiny dip in brightness, which if you can measure the brightness of a star very precisely and you see these periodic dips in brightness, it tells you that there could be a planet going around the star. And so just to give a rough sense of how large the changes in brightness are, for a Jupiter-sized planet, it would cause a roughly 1% change in brightness. So the brightness of the star, of a sun-like star, would dip by 1%. And for an Earth-like planet, it would be 100 times smaller than that. So it would be 1% of 1% of a change in brightness. And as you can imagine, this is a pretty difficult thing to do. But it can be done, and in fact has been done for a long time, for more than 20 years, in fact. And the early exoplanets surveys from the ground were mostly transit-based, and two of the most successful exoplanet surveys from the ground have been WASP and HATNet, and both of these have discovered roughly around 100 to 200 planets each. But one of the problems with trying to search for transits from the ground is that the atmosphere gets in the way, and that's a big problem because if you've ever looked at the sky, you'll know that the stars twinkle, and that's because of various atmospheric effects, where you have turbulence in the air that changes the brightness of the stars independent of the stars themselves. So it's purely things that happen on Earth that change the brightness of the star. And so if you really want to search for small planets or planets around fainter stars, then you kind of have to get above the atmosphere. Otherwise, the noise that's caused by all the atmospheric turbulence, even on the best observatories on Earth, will just swamp out the signal completely. And so by far the most successful exoplanet hunting mission to date, at least, was the Kepler mission, and Kepler discovered more than 2,500 confirmed planets. That doesn't even include the planets that were found by the K2 mission, which was basically what Kepler was repurposed into after the failure of its reaction wheels. And so Kepler was a roughly 1 meter diameter telescope and was able to detect very small changes in brightness, as small as you would need to detect an Earth-like planet going around a sun-like star. So the precision of Kepler was on the order of 1% of 1%, which is amazing. And you would not be able to do that from the ground. Unfortunately, Kepler didn't last forever. And so after about 8 to 9 years in space, it ended its mission. And today we have TESS. And TESS is a really great successor to Kepler because it's not just the same thing as Kepler, but it does something very different. And as you can see from the cartoon on the screen, TESS actually has 4 separate cameras, and each of these 4 cameras looks at a different part of the sky. And over the course of its 2-year mission, the field of view of TESS rotates, and so over the course of 2 years, it actually observes the entire sky. And TESS was launched in 2018, and so it's really been observing for almost 4 years, which means that it's observed most of the sky twice already. And so here in this picture, you can see the different sectors that are observed at any given time, and the spacecraft rotates its field of view so that over the course of 2 years, it observes the entire sky. All right, so that's the brief overview of what TESS is and how it searches for planets. Now let's dig into the data and see how you too can find a planet. All right, so this Jupyter notebook is on the course's GitHub page, so you can take a look later on. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be using this Python package called Lightcurve, which is developed by people at NASA to help us to be able to download and to be able to analyze the light curves from TESS. And so if you go to the Lightcurve page, here it's spelled with a K, so LIGHT KURVE, you will be able to see more tutorials and all the documentation that you may need to understand how to use it. But today I'm just going to give you a brief overview of how we might do it. So as I mentioned, TESS observes each sector of the sky for 27 days at a time and monitors the stars in the sky for those changes in brightness. And after the 27 days has passed, it downloads the data to Earth, and pretty soon after, just a few weeks later, it's already available publicly. And so that's, I think, one of the most remarkable aspects of the TESS mission is that all of the data is publicly available, which means anyone can access it. And so we'll use Lightcurve to download and look at some of this data. And in particular, we'll be searching for and recovering TESS's first exoplanet, Pi Mensae C, which was published in 2018. So to do this, you'll need to install the Lightcurve package, and I included the code that you would need to install it here. You can just run it in the Jupyter Notebook, or if you run it in your terminal window, you'll just remove the exclamation mark in front. But because I've already installed it, I'm not going to run that cell. Instead, we'll start by importing all the packages we need. So these are just NumPy, Matplotlib that you've seen before, as well as Lightcurve, which I've imported as LK. So the first step to be able to look at some of the TESS data is to search for it and download it. So Lightcurve has a very convenient search function. It's just search _ Lightcurve, and you can give it the name of the star. So not all stars have names, of course, and you can instead give it the ID and the TESS input catalog. So Pi Mensae is also known as TIC 2611366679, and so you can search for any star that way. I've selected to download the TESS data, and in fact, Lightcurve lets you download data from Kepler as well. And in this particular case, I've also selected the author to be SPOC, which is the TESS Science Processing Operations Center. And so basically, there are various pipelines that have processed the TESS data, and you can find all of them online, but today we'll just focus on the SPOC pipeline, which is, the official NASA pipeline to download the data. So if you just run this cell and you look at the search results, it'll take a couple of seconds to do the query, but you'll find a whole list of the data products. And so Pi Mensae has been observed actually in multiple sectors of TESS. So if you remember the diagram of what the different TESS sectors look like, some of them overlap. So Pi Mensae is in one of these overlapping regions, and it was observed in sector 1, 4, 8, 11, 12, 13, etc. And it's also a star that was observed with a 2-minute cadence. So the exposure time column here says 120 seconds. But also, in fact, in the extended mission of the TESS, so after the first 2 years, it was also selected for 20-second cadence observations. And so you can see that in sector 27, this star was observed with a 20-second cadence. So you can see there's tons of data available for this star. But for today, we'll just focus on looking at the sector 1 data, which is what they used to discover the planet. So how do we download it? So if you only want to download the first row, which corresponds to sector 1's data, you'll see that the first index is 0. And so if you go to search _ result 0, and then you type .download, it downloads the Lightcurve. And we can plot this data just by typing lc.scatter or lc.plot, and you can see the data here. So it's kind of messy, the data. These are all of each point is, there's a point every 2 minutes, and so it's a pretty noisy Lightcurve. But even by eye, because this is such a bright star, you can actually kind of see the transits already. I don't know if many of you will be able to spot them, but you'll see a tiny dip in brightness here. There's another tiny dip in brightness here. And so these are actually the planet's transits. But as you can see, there's also tons of other random things that happen. So there's a gap in the data here, and that's because in the middle of every sector, TESS downlinks part of its data to the Earth. And after that, it needs time to be able to point back to where it's looking. And so there's a gap in data, and the data right after this gap is kind of wonky. There's some weird stuff going on here. It actually is because of some pointing issues that the spacecraft had. Remember, this was the first sector of the mission, and so there are plenty of bugs to be ironed out. And there's also some very tiny dips here, like for instance, this one, that might trick you into thinking there's a transit, but it may not necessarily be. In fact, this particular dip here is actually just some issue of the spacecraft. So if we want to actually search this light curve for planetary transits, we'll have to do some cleaning. Unfortunately, part of that cleaning of the data has really been done for us. So in this particular case, the light curve I'm showing you is known as the simple aperture photometry column. And so that's just taken by taking the star's brightness and just plotting it over time. So it's not corrected for anything. But the Spock light curves, so the light curves that were produced by NASA, have also another column, which is the PDC SAP flux. And that stands for Pre-Search Data Conditioning, where they've tried to correct the light curves of some of the systematics that occur with the spacecraft. So if you type lc.select_flux and you select that column instead of the SAP flux column, and you plot it, now you see it's a lot cleaner. So you can see the transits a lot more clearly, but all of the very large systematics are gone. For instance, this huge ramp here that occurred just after the data downlink, it's been corrected off because that's really just a function of the spacecraft. And because we know what the spacecraft is doing at any given time, we can try to correct for those effects. There's still a bunch of other effects. You can see a slight modulation in this light curve. So for best results, I would suggest cleaning this data again. Unfortunately, light curve also has a flatten function, which basically runs a high pass filter to remove any low level trends. So I've done that here. So I type lc.flatten, given it a window length, which is here it's 501 pixels. So it's basically 1,000 minutes. That's the kind of the where this frequency at which the signals will be filtered out. And I've also typed this .remove outliers just to remove any random outliers that may occur in the light curve. And so if you run that and you plot that again, now you see some of these weird curves in the light curve have been flattened out, but it didn't really do much else. And that's because this light curve is really pretty clean. Okay, so now we have a clean light curve. You can kind of see the transits, and we know now at least they're not from spacecraft systematics. So how do we find the transits? If you're given this light curve, sure, you can see it by eye, but that's not super scientific, so how might we actually go about finding the transits? So the most common method used to find planetary transits and light curves is an algorithm that was developed in 2002 called the box least squares algorithm, and basically tries to fit a box shape for the transit. And it searches many different periods to find the best period where you could possibly have a transit event. And again, light curve has a very convenient built-in function to perform this search, and it basically produces a periodogram, which is similar to a Fourier spectrum. So here I just type lc.to_periodogram, and I use BLS, which stands for the box least squares, and I can plot that periodogram. And so what you see here is a plot of BLS power against the period. So basically what the algorithm is doing is that it's taking all of these different possible planet periods or transit event periods and is searching for whether there is a transit at that period. And if there is, then there will be a good match, and the higher this peak, the stronger the match is to the transit. So as you can see here, there's a very strong peak at just over 6 days. And we can see what that period is by typing BLS.period underscore at max power. So this is the peak with the maximum power. And we can also find the transit time of it. So now that we have period, what we can do is that we can look at the light curve with our own eyes again to see if it's a real signal. to that, we fold the light curve on that period, and that means we repeat the time series every p days, where p is the period. And again, light curve has a function to do that, where it's lc.fold, and you have to give it the period and the time at which the transit occurs. And so I generate the folded light curve, and if we plot that, it's taking a moment because I'm also binning the light curve, so to make it easier to see the transit. Yeah, and so this is basically the same light curve, but now what I've done is I've taken all of these transit events and folded them on top of each other. And so that helps to build up the signal to noise as well. And so in gray, I've shown all of the individual points. Remember, these are all taken at every 2 minutes. And in red, I've binned the data so that now there's one red point every 30 minutes. And you can see a beautiful transit here. It has the shape that you expect from a planetary transit. And yeah, this is basically the transit that represents the very first planet that TESS discovered. So we can just check to see if the transit occurred, if what we found is the real planet that this paper by Chelsea Huang et al. Found, and they found a period of 6.27 days, which is basically the same as what we found. And of course, if you actually want to analyze and characterize the system, and what this paper did was to do a more detailed analysis of the system. They got more observations, so they got radial velocities or high-resolution spectra of the star, but they also fit all of the data together. And so you can also do that with a code like Batman, which helps to fit the transit event, or Exoplanet, which lets you fit transit events and radial velocity data. But that we'll hear about some of these other codes later on, but we're not going to do that today. What we've done is we've already been able to find the planet. And just as a little bonus, LightCurve also has a very convenient interactive box least square algorithm where it actually makes all of the plots I just showed you at once, and you can kind of zoom into the data, and you can see the transit here. So the model isn't very good, but you can still see the data in black at the back, and you can see the same transit event that we found. And if you click this, if you click a different peak, it will recalculate everything, and it will fold the data on that new period to see, so that you can see if that's actually a real transit event or just some issue with the data, or in this particular case, actually what these different peaks represent are actually aliases of the transit event. Okay, it's supposed to select this if you click it, but I guess it's not working on my computer, but you should give it a shot. And one of the assignments I put at the end of this document was to try to search for planets in multi-planet systems. And so I think this is particularly useful when you have many different periods that you might want to investigate. So the last thing we're going to look at today is to look at the TESS objects of interest list. And that's because if you don't want to search for transit candidates itself, you don't have to worry, because the TESS team has already done it for you, and they've already searched all of these light curves and vetted all of the transit candidates. And so they've published a list of TESS objects of interest, and you can find that at this link that I've provided. And you can see there are almost 6,000 TESS objects of interest currently available. And you can download this entire table. This table gives you a ton of information about each transit event and the star that it orbits. For instance, TOI-101, which is the first TOI that was flagged by the pipeline. It says here is a known planet, so it's previously known before TESS. And if you scroll to the right, there's a ton of data in this column, and you can see that it's actually WASP 46b, so it's known before TESS. You can also see what kind of star it orbits. So it orbits a star that's quite similar to our sun, with an effective temperature of 5,600 Kelvin, and it's about 400 parsecs away. So there's a lot of data here to play with, and you can download the entire table just by clicking download table, and you can download all of the rows or some subset of them. can also download them directly using pandas. So here I've actually typed in the URL of the data website, and I can just read the data directly from that website and look at it. So it's going to take a minute to download the data. I guess the website is being a little bit slow today. But yeah, so also on this website, since we're waiting, there's a ton of other information that you can look at. For instance, I think Pi Mensae is TOI 144, and if you click on this link, it will actually bring you to a new page that actually gives you a ton of other information about it. For example, other observations that other people have made that you can see at the bottom. So people have taken various spectroscopic observations of this, and so on. All right, so the data is downloaded. So again, here I'm showing just the first 5 rows of that table that's on their website. But now that I've got it into Python, into a Python notebook, you can do all kinds of interesting things with it. You can look at how the different TOIs are distributed. And so here I've now plot all of the TESS objects of interest as a function of the orbital period on the x-axis and the planet radius in Earth radii on the y-axis. And so you can see that most of the planet candidates that TESS has found have orbital periods of about less than 30 days. And that's because TESS observes each sector for only 27 days. So it's very difficult for TESS to be able to find planets that have longer orbital periods. Most of these planets will be in those areas where the sectors overlap. And also there's a ton of planets that are up here, which are bigger and still cause larger signals. There are a bunch of planets down here, and if you might remember from your reading last week, these objects between 2 and 4 Earth radii are basically super Earths or sub-Neptunes, as we will call them today. And the ones up here are basically hot Jupiters. And the reason why there's so many more up here is just because they're easier to find. Hot Jupiters are actually very rare. They occur around only 1% of sun-like stars or less, but because the signal that they provide is like 100 times bigger than for an Earth-like planet, it's just so much easier to find them. All right, so now I think I've given a good introduction to TESS and how you can use the TESS data to search for planets yourself. And so I left a couple of additional assignments here, and so you might want to try them out. And there's also a ton of other resources on the Light Curve documentation page.